Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne, and today I am once again going to be turning deadly poisons into character designs. So the first poison I want to talk about is anthrax. Anthrax is actually a bacteria, and it also travels in spores. The spores are the really dangerous aspect of anthrax. And when I think of anthrax, and I think this is true for most people, at least in the United States, I think about the mail, because in 2001 there was a big, I guess bioterrorism you would call it, attack through the mail, where anthrax spores were sent inside of envelopes to various different politicians, mainly Democratic senators, 5 of which actually died. And after this, a ton of anthrax hoaxes were also happening. So the Postal Service actually had to create a system to try to detect anthrax in the mail. The other major player when it comes to anthrax is actually the Soviet Union. They secretly had a biowarfare project that they were working on and made hundreds of tons of anthrax during this time. And there was an incident where this lab accidentally released a ton of anthrax into a town, now a Russian town, but at the time it was part of the Soviet Union. And 68 people actually died from that, and they had to try to cover it up because it was hugely illegal. They'd already signed basically the Hague Treaty and agreed not to do any biowarfare, so it was kind of a huge scandal, and of course very tragic that so many people died just from an accident. But basically anthrax can harm you in a lot of different ways. It depends on how it enters your body. The most common kind is anthrax of the skin, where it gets under your skin, basically through any kind of cut or a bite or something like that, and it basically causes your skin to sort of necrotize. It becomes black and spreads. This is the least fatal form of anthrax poisoning, but it's still very grotesque looking, and I don't recommend looking it up. The more deadly forms are when the spores get into your lungs, for example, or into your digestive system. That's really bad. Basically anywhere that anthrax gets, it's going to cause a lot of harm. So I tried to, considering its history, I tried to make a character whose uniform kind of blends a Postal Service cape as well as a sort of Soviet Union outfit, just because these are kind of the major sources where anthrax actually killed more than one person. And I wanted this character to be sort of faceless. A lot of the incidences with anthrax have been very mysterious and cause a lot of confusion before people really figure out exactly what's going on. So I basically just made it this formless creature that kind of looks like the actual strain under a microscope. I just thought that shattered strands that they look like is very scary and would work well for this monster design. And of course I have the envelopes sort of coming out from the center of this character, as this is the most famous, at least for me, incidents of someone trying to disperse anthrax into the population. I did the Postal Service cape design because anthrax does exceptionally well in the cold. In fact, there's a real concern that global warming, as it heats up old animal carcasses in the Arctic, that it might release a ton of anthrax. There was actually a 2016 anthrax outbreak, which was linked to a 75-year-old carcass that had defrosted during a heat wave. Russian researchers estimate that there are 1.5 million anthrax-infected reindeer carcasses that are a part of the Arctic permafrost. So if the planet warms up and some of that permafrost defrosts, we could have a real problem with anthrax on our hands. It's definitely a scary prospect. Next up is cyanide. Now, this is an extremely famous poison. Many of you brought it up on my last poisons video asking where it was, and this is part of the reason why I really wanted to do a part 2. Cyanide is an incredibly popular poison for intentional use. It is famously used in pop culture a lot for spies who will hide a capsule in their tooth or something like that, so that they can essentially get out of there off this mortal coil if they are captured, because they don't want to be tortured and have to reveal their secrets. And this is based in some reality, actually. There are a few different cases where espionage situations have led to cyanide use. In 1997, a Soviet diplomat who was spying on behalf of the Colombian Intelligence Agency and U.S. Central Intelligence Agency was arrested in Russia. And during the interrogations, he said he would write out a full confession. He just asked for his pen, but at the top of his pen, he had hidden a cyanide capsule and he bit into it. And according to the Russians, he died before he even hit the floor, which is really the factor about cyanide that makes it special and makes it very useful for these sort of clandestine operations to use. It is a very, very quick poison, unlike we saw with polonium-210, which made quite a spectacle of that death. There is very little fanfare when it comes to dying of cyanide poisoning, if there is actually enough in the person. The other thing about cyanide, when it's not being used intentionally and when it's used in accidents, usually it's because of smoke. There have been multiple nightclub fires specifically where a fire starts and the insulation burning causes cyanide gas to sort of start building up, and that is incredibly fatal. Hundreds and hundreds of people have died in multiple different fires like this. It makes the smoke just like incredibly toxic. So that is another situation in which cyanide is a real problem. So that's why I made her hair kind of look sort of smoky. And there's been a lot of cases where people have hidden cyanide pills or bottles of cyanide with them when they're going to court to see if they're going to be found guilty of various crimes, and then they have taken it when they are found guilty. So it's kind of used as an exit strategy for some people. It was also famously used in Jonestown, which was the most famous like cult killing that we've seen in I think maybe ever. 909 people died in Jonestown when they were commanded to drink this like Flavor Aid. It's basically like Kool-Aid that had cyanide mixed in. According to some reports of some people who survived, they were threatening to shoot people who didn't drink it or telling them that it wasn't actually poisoned. Apparently they did a bunch of like fake versions of it, so some people didn't really believe that it was poisoned, and so unfortunately a lot of people probably did not know that they were drinking poison at the time. It's a very tragic situation. I wanted to show this character in sort of these formal kind of businessy clothes and holding this classic scale, justice, but she's pulling down on it because cyanide is being used to sort of change the scales for higher powers, like when they lose an agent, for example. They're making sure that loss doesn't actually lead in them losing information at the cost of human life. I think that's what makes cyanide so disturbing, is like it really doesn't have the fanfare and the insanity that a lot of these other deadly substances have. It's like this colorless, tasteless, odorless, very quick acting poison. So the people who end up using it are usually just dispassionately using it for their own goals, whether that is religious goals like in Jonestown or goals of a government. It just seems incredibly emotionless and cold. This next one is considered by many to be sort of a like king of poisons, like the ultimate most like toxic or dangerous substance possibly to humans ever. That is botulinum, which causes botulism. Now botulism is an illness that you contract when you consume botulinum toxin. And it gets inside you some way or another. Oftentimes this happens when someone incorrectly tries to preserve food and the bacteria is allowed to sort of replicate inside like a can or something like that, and then people eat it. That is a common way for people to get botulism. Now, unlike a lot of like poisons or toxins that we've talked about in the past, which usually cause fading consciousness, comas, seizures, that sort of thing. Botulism is a little different. It really causes essentially like exhaustion. It doesn't really affect your consciousness, so you're aware of what's happening. It's kind of like TTX in that way from the previous video, but it looks like you're sort of passing out. Oftentimes they're able to detect it in people who are sick with this because they can't keep their eyes open. Their face is just sort of going completely not blank, but like completely relaxed, and it looks like they're falling asleep, and they can't really move, but they're completely conscious and completely like awake. So it's very, very strange. It basically causes problems with your cranial nerves, which is basically what helps you with like your eye movements and your facial muscles and swallowing. And it also can cause like confusion. It honestly sounds really terrible to experience, like most of these things, I guess. The other interesting thing about this toxin is that it's used in cosmetic surgery. So I really wanted to, for this character, pair these two ideas, which is like this overwhelming, extremely fatal exhaustion that the disease causes, and then have these little fragments of, the other usage of this deadly substance, which is to basically freeze your face and stop your wrinkles from showing up. This is why, when people get Botox, it's like they can't really move their eyebrows anymore. Like their forehead might be smooth, but they can't really express themselves as much. It's kind of like a micro version of what happens if you are infected with botulism, where your whole face goes completely slack. Now, if you get the disease, you might die because you can't really swallow or like breathe, and it causes a lot of problems with your automatic nervous system. Ultimately, death usually occurs because the patient literally can't breathe out all the carbon dioxide that they need to, because they're so like limp and paralyzed, and that's really terrible and a very unusual way for one of these like deadly substances to affect you. I tried to make this sort of like sludgy monster design kind of look like a mixture of just like molasses, which would kind of hold you down and make you feel like if you were covered in molasses, like the molasses flood, it makes you feel like you can't move. It's so heavy. And then at the top, I made it more golden colored because I wanted it to look like honey, because this is actually the reason that you're not supposed to give babies honey. Honey has like tiny amounts of botulism in it sometimes, which is not going to be a problem for an adult, but it's definitely a problem for a little tiny baby. So because honey is one of the major ways that we in the modern world actually still have to worry about botulism, I wanted the monster design to sort of reflect that. So basically it looks, this design is very, very monstrous. I think botulism is quite terrifying. It's a very sad kind of way to go, and it's very tied in with food, so that's also why I kind of went with the honey angle. Honestly, because botulism is so deadly, I wanted to push it more into like the monster zone rather than just a straight up character design. Alright, here they all are together, and then here are all the poisons that I've done so far. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Huge thank you to all of my patrons, including Dumb Possum, Hannah Kendall, Jabber Dabber Doo, Teddy Spaghetti, Avant Grape, Gender Was Stolen, Haley, Beelzebub, For Spookable, Bigish, it's Jamal, Kay, Rodrigo, Kubo, Momok, Kadaria, Deadly Nightshade Art, Maria Vasquez, Astrofox Art, Middle Z, Lily Allure, The Expressive Poker Face, Morrissey Axolotl, Subaki, Michael Lavalley, Cutie Pie, Rune Raincrow, Rainwater Pearls, Ice Cream Pal, Kola, Insadmia, your boy ST, JJ Jade, and of course, Libla Blah Blah.